badly damaged fire truck pulled from the ruins of the World Trade Center, a poignant reminder to rescue workers of what is at risk.
Investigators find links between two targets of terrorism, the attack on the Pentagon and on the USS Cole.
And killed in the line of duty, New York firefighters lay their leader to rest. Hello, I'm Michael Holmes.
And I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America's new war. United States President George W. Bush telling Americans once again today to prepare themselves for war.
That's right. Speaking at Camp David on Saturday, Mr. Bush said his National Security Council is planning a comprehensive assault on terrorism, and he vowed that America would win that struggle. No details of any pending assault have been released, but Mr. Bush is warning it will likely take time and it will take sacrifice.
And in New York, the search for survivors continues through the night, but now, nearly 5 days after the tragedy, hopes are beginning to fade. No survivors were found Saturday. No one's been pulled out alive now since Wednesday. In the meantime, a second man is being held as a material witness in connection with the attacks. The first material witness was arrested Thursday at Kennedy Airport in New York. A total of 25 people are being questioned. Authorities say evidence so far is strengthening the case against chief suspect Osama bin Laden.
Distant ages seen so longing for their end.
Thousands of mourners gathered at a funeral for New York City fire chaplain Michael Judge. He was killed while administering the last rites to a dying firefighter. Two other New York City Fire Department officials also laid to rest Saturday, including the city's fire chief. And that, sadly, is only the start. More than 300 firefighters remain missing. The investigation into Tuesday's attacks is the largest in United States history. Authorities now say that two of the hijackers were on an FBI watch list. Eileen O'Connor has more on that.
They booked the tickets on American Airlines Flight 77 from Washington to Los Angeles on Travelocity, using a New Jersey address, mailboxes, etc. And names U.S. officials confirm were known to them: Khalid al-Midhar and Salim al-Hamzi. Once on board, together with al-Hamzi's brother and an old roommate, a known pilot, they took over the flight, crashing it into the Pentagon. Within minutes, the facade of a symbol of American strength crumbled. As the search and rescue efforts continue, sources say the FBI was informed that Khalid al-Midhar and Salim al-Hamzi were associated with Osama bin Laden and the bombing of the USS Cole. One source confirms al-Midhar was seen on surveillance tape in Malaysia, meeting with the suspect in that bombing.
One was kind of short and the other two was tall.
Al-Midhar was a frequent visitor of al-Hamzi and his brother Nawak in the San Diego apartment complex.
They was always together. If they left, they was together. They come back, they together.
They hung out a lot at the pool, despite telling their neighbors they were studying at a nearby college.
You'll see three of them in the pool swimming, or you'll see the dude always looking out the window, another one outside the door on the phone.
At one point, they left, telling one landlord they were in Arizona, living in different cities at different addresses. As it turns out, rooming with another hijacker aboard that plane, Hani Hanjour. Hani attended this flying school, CRM, Cockpit Resource Management, but left without a certification.
He's kind of a waste of time. He wouldn't show up for flights on time, didn't do his homework.
Not a promising student, but skilled enough to carry out the mission. Eileen O'Connor, CNN, Washington.
The Justice Department is releasing more information about the alleged hijackers and the terrorist network thought to have sponsored Tuesday's attacks. CNN has obtained photos of 8 of those suspected hijackers. We want to show you all of that now. From American Airlines Flight 11, which hit the World Trade Center's North Tower, Mohammed Atta, Walid al-Shari, Abdelaziz al-Omari, and Walid M. Ali Shari. From United Airlines Flight 175, which hit the World Trade Center's South Tower, Marwan El-Shehi, and from United Airlines Flight 93, which crashed in rural Pennsylvania, Saeed Al-Ghamdi, Ahmed El-Haznawi, and Ziad Samir Jahra. Well, the attacks showed that the United States and the world that it is not easy to identify hijackers before they commit their crimes, but investigators have managed to identify some common traits. Our national correspondent Mike Betcher has that.
To help them better understand the group of people that managed to successfully hijack 4 aircraft, investigators have put together a list of common characteristics of those 19 people. Let's take a look at the list. The first 2 items, male, early 20s, that's obvious. But it also says they're likely to have Saudi passports, likely to have visas issued in Saudi Arabia, and also clean-shaven and Western appearance. Now, we also have another document which was given as evidence in the African embassy trial, and it is the Al-Qaeda training manual. Al-Qaeda, of course, the group U.S. officials say is the terrorist umbrella organization under Osama bin Laden, and this is their operational manual, the thing that they gave to their operatives worldwide, telling them how to carry out an operation. We thought we would compare this to the common characteristics on the list. Let's look at items number 3 and 4, likely to have a Saudi passport, likely to have visas issued in Saudi Arabia. Let's see what the Al-Qaeda trading manual says about that. All documents of the undercover brothers, such as identity card and passport, should be falsified. Now that means, if you look at the common characteristic list, it says most of them have Saudi passports. It's very likely, if this was an Al-Qaeda operation, that those passports, or many of them, were falsified. Let's go back to the common characteristics list. The last item, clean-shaven, Western appearance. Now, if you go into the operations manual, let's see what they tell their operatives to do in terms of appearance. It says the photograph of the brother in these documents should be without a beard. So it was followed in this case. And there is one other item that is not a personal characteristic, but it's an operational characteristic. Item number 7 in the operational manual of Al-Qaeda, when it talks about what targets to choose, says blasting and destroying the embassies and attacking vital economic centers. If this was an Al-Qaeda operation, they did follow their manual to a T.
Rescue workers in New York are refusing to give up hope. They say they still believe there are people buried alive under the pile of destruction. Now, for more on this, let's go to our Gary Tuckman standing by in New York. Gary, what can you bring us?
Michael, the World Trade Center building and the surrounding area used to be one of the most pleasant and convenient places to work. You could take the subway right into the building. You didn't have to go outside. On a nice day, you could sit outside by the Hudson River, eat your lunch, look at the Statue of Liberty, look at the boats coming by. There was an observatory on the 110th floor, a great place to take children. They had virtual reality games, a beautiful view out the window. They had a lunchroom that looked like Central Park with trees. Now that's all gone. What we have behind me now, where the World Trade Center used to be, is a cauldron of fire and smoke. And what's really incredible, and I've been here since the very beginning, but I still can't get used to the fact, basically you have a graveyard behind me with up to 5,000 bodies still buried in this rubble. We have some pictures we want to show you, shot by a man who was one of the rescue workers who went out there the first couple of days to help out, and he brought his video camera there. The police are not allowing the news media to get too close to Ground Zero, so we're relying on this type of video to show you. And we want to give you a picture of the masses of steel that are piled up to 100 feet high in places. It's literally like a mountain range, all the debris that is out here. It's estimated there are 600,000 tons of rubble. 22,000 tons have now been removed. That's less than 4% of the estimated amount of rubble. But what is also there are the victims, and hopefully survivors. But for the last 3 days, not one survivor has been found, and that is very disappointing news, but they are still looking. Something that was found today, an extraordinary, poignant sight, a fire truck. And this shows you how deep the rubble is. The fire truck was pulled out by crane out of the rubble. It sat on it, ladder 18. It was completely destroyed. There were no people inside that fire truck, but that gives you an idea of what they're contending with here at this rubble site here at the World Trade Center. World Trade Center consisted of 200,000 tons of steel, 14 acres of windows, and if anyone tells you they know how long it will take to clean this area up, they're not telling you the truth, because no one's ever experienced anything like this before, no one's ever dealt with anything like this before, and no one really knows how long it will take. Michael, back to you.
Gary, as you've reported over past days, there is still hope for survivors, as there has been from the start, but as each day, each hour passes, that hope must fade a little. Is that affecting morale there on the scene?
It certainly is, Michael, because there was great hope, considering the fact that so many people are involved. There are 4,972 people missing. There is great hope they could find a great number of survivors, and they did find 6 survivors over the first 2 days. They found them in pockets under the rubble, so they weren't hit by the rubble. They were actually under the rubble, and they were able to dig and get them out. And they're hopeful they would find a lot. And what really scares a lot of the rescue workers and diminishes their feelings right now and makes them feel very badly is the fact that these people who went through such horror could have suffered even more for a period of hours or even days waiting to be rescued and then passing away while waiting for the rescue that never came.
All right, Gary Tuckman in New York at 2:11 on the East Coast here. Thanks, Gary. Well, mourners gathered in New York as 3 firefighters killed in the aftermath of the attacks on the World Trade Center were laid to rest. The 3 were among the group of firefighters who rushed to the scene when the first plane struck on Tuesday. They included that beloved chaplain we mentioned before, Reverend Michael Judge, who had comforted colleagues for decades. He was killed by falling debris while administering last rites to a dying firefighter. New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani was one of the thousands in attendance.
I believe a recognition for many of us that this is only the first group of funerals that we're going to have to conduct for our men and women and so many whose lives were lost at the World Trade Center. My heart goes out to the men and women of the fire department in particular and their families.
About 300 firefighters remain unaccounted for. Well, as rescue workers dig through the pile of rubble for signs of survivors, friends and families are also actively searching for their missing loved ones. For more on that, let's go to CNN's Michael Oku. He's at the Armory in New York, where thousands have been providing information on those still unaccounted for. Michael, what can you bring us?
Well, Michael, I can tell you that there is a very tired, weary feeling that has taken grip of this city. So many people have shed so many tears over the course of these days. And in the coming days, and in fact I'm beginning to hear it already, you will likely start hearing words and phrases that are so often used at times like this that they have a ring of cliche. Words like resolution and moving forward and a returning to normalcy. But for so many people, possibly tens of thousands of people that may be connected to what they hoped are still almost 5,000 lives underneath the ash and rubble at the World Trade Center, there will be no returning to normalcy. How they try to find resolution is by coming here. I'm in front of the Armory, which is at 26th Street and Lexington Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. And here is where relatives can come forward and fill out essentially what is a 7-page form where they can give information to some of the rescue workers and some of the authorities here. That might help connect authorities' investigation to identifying some of those people who have been recovered. They are asked to give them all kinds of identifiable information, from the color of their ears and the color of their eyes and their hair, to any recognizable scars they may have, even the kind of nail polish they like to wear. Over the course of the past few days, 3,100 people, relatives, have passed through the doors behind me. And at some point today, the New York Health Department announced the fact that a company called LabCorp, which is one of the biggest medical lab companies in the country, has offered to provide free DNA collections that may ultimately connect some of those bodies that have been recovered to a real identification. I spoke to one young woman earlier this evening who is looking for her godmother.
This is the only way that they can identify. So we've come in with hairbrushes, toothbrushes. Her brother took a saliva sample for DNA, and everyone's willing to do anything, but it's just a matter of waiting.
Now, LabCorp, as I mentioned, is one of the biggest medical lab companies across the country. They have 900 centers around the United States, and they've offered a number that relatives can call who are not in New York City, who don't have access to this particular armory and some of the sources here. And that number is 888-520-6952. I'll repeat that again, 888-520-6952. There's been an incredible outpouring of emotion at this particular location as New Yorkers try to get back to what they believe is a sense of normalcy. But while some of us are thinking about what happens next, there are still so many people who are thinking and focused on perhaps what was. Michael.
Sense of normalcy, as you say, Michael. It's going to be a while before that comes back, and it'll probably be a different normalcy. You know, I've been noticing a lot of young people out there, a lot of young people in New York City wearing the red, white and blue. You know, the younger generation, Generation Y, Generation X, whatever you want to call it, haven't been known for their patriotism in this day and age. Tell me your impressions.
My impressions are this, that the impact, what has been felt by what happened just some blocks south of where I'm standing, knows no boundaries. It knows no color distinction. It knows no ethnic distinction. It knows no age distinction. New Yorkers are not known for being a compassionate lot. But if you walk around this town, as I have in the past 3 or 4 days now, everybody has been hit with this compassionate feeling. Just on my way down here, I saw a group of people who were standing and singing, and it looked like it was a group of people who didn't really know each other. They had come by, and some shop owner had his television tuned into CNN. People were watching it, and another group next to them started singing. There are so many stories like that across the city, and they involve all kinds of people of all ages and of all colors.
You're seeing it up close too, Michael Oakley. Thanks very much. Now, I want to tell you that our internet website provides a special service for those seeking information about people missing after the attacks. You can post the person's name, also their picture on our website. You can see one of them there. Information on the missing can be sent to us here at missing@cnn.com. Obviously, that's an email address. Okay, now let's update you on the latest developments as we know them at the moment. The grim task of clearing debris from the fallen Twin Towers goes on in New York City. These are live pictures now. Mayor Rudy Giuliani says authorities are taking it day by day and deciding when the operation switches from a rescue to a recovery mode, as we've been discussing in the last few minutes. And more promising news on the investigative front. A Justice Department official tells CNN a second person has been taken into FBI custody in New York. Now, that man is considered a material witness in the terror attacks, as was the earlier man arrested. President Bush is continuing to draw up plans for a U.S. response to the hijackings. Mr. Bush met Saturday with his national security advisors at Camp David. He also called the leaders of Mexico and Spain as part of his effort to build an international coalition against terrorism. Colleen.
All right, Michael. Well, should the United States decide to launch an offensive, and if that offensive is against Afghanistan, that is going to create its own challenges in and of itself. It's a mountainous country, far removed from most U.S. allies. The closest and most likely launching place for any attack is Pakistan. And Pakistan's President, General Pervez Musharraf, has pledged to help the United States, but on the other hand, his is one of the few countries to actually maintain ties to Afghanistan's ruling Taliban. Well, two veteran diplomats say that dealing with terrorists in such a conflict would call for a new and demanding style of war.
This time around, we have a lot of enemies. We know some of them. We will find out more of them. They have an interlocking network. There's no question about that. And it's going to be much tougher to get at them. And it's going to be therefore a much more complicated and long-term effort. The Iraq War was over in, 6 weeks, whatever it was. That will not be the case this time. This is going to take some years to accomplish. And you have to hope and pray that the President can lead us all for that period of time and keep the support up.
Countries have to be put on notice that safe havens for terrorists will no longer be accepted by the United States. These terrorists cannot undertake the actions that we have experienced last week unless they have a base from which they operate, unless they have an organization, communications. It takes a long planning, and we cannot permit them the period of quiet in which they prepare and then they strike us.
Well, officials in Washington keep suggesting that the investigation does point to Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden. So attention is turning to Afghanistan's ruling Taliban. The fundamentalist Islamic militia is believed to be giving bin Laden sanctuary. Mind you, the Taliban have said that they don't believe that bin Laden could have had anything to do with these attacks. It's a poor country, they say. It would be impossible to train pilots there. Meanwhile, fighters in the opposition Northern Alliance are mourning the death of their leader. A bomb attack last week mortally wounded Ahmed Shah Massoud. And Steve Harrigan joins us now by our video phone from northern Afghanistan with more on this. Steve?
Colleen, a very emotional funeral is just unwinding here in remote northern Afghanistan. Thousands of Afghani villagers traveled from all around, many of them on foot, to pay their last respects to Ahmad Shah Massoud. Mr. Massoud, of course, fought first the Soviets and then the Taliban for more than the past 20 years. So a very emotional day here. His body arrived by helicopter. People were throwing roses on it, flowers, wailing, crying. A most emotional day here in remote northern Afghanistan. Now, as you know, Mr. Massoud was assassinated by a television camera that exploded just before the terrorist attacks in the United States. So what they're saying here, his supporters say that those two events are linked. They say the assassination of their leader is closely tied to the terrorist attacks in the United States. And we have the unique situation here of opposition figures in northern Afghanistan calling for military action against their own country. We've talked to high officials here in the Islamic State of Afghanistan. They say they want military action by the United States in Afghanistan against the Taliban. They say they are ready to join in that fight, fighting side by side with U.S. soldiers should those events come to pass. Colleen.
Steve, how strong is this opposition? Help us understand exactly where it fits here.
It is a shifting coalition. They say they have about 15,000 regular fighters ready to go, perhaps as many as 15,000 irregulars who would join them as soon as possible. They control about 5 to 10% of the country, and mostly they're located here in one of the most remote places on Earth, a very mountainous, desert-like culture of northern Afghanistan. So the question for the opposition here is, how will they fare after the assassination of their charismatic leader, Massoud? Will they be able to bind together and form a new leader? And eventually, will they be able to take part in any operations should they come against the Taliban? Those questions still unanswered. Colleen.
You know, Steve, there's a lot of discussion right now in the United States about the difficulties that Afghanistan would create if there were to be some sort of military action and if it were to be against Afghanistan. You know a lot about that. You know the kinds of problems that the Soviets had there. What would be the challenges?
Certainly anyone visiting Afghanistan, walking around here, looking at this terrain, it becomes readily apparent just what an enormous undertaking it would be to carry on a war in this kind of terrain. Also, history, as you mentioned, the Soviet Union fought for 10 years here against the Afghanis and were driven out. That defeat really in some ways helped to bring about the fall of communism in the Soviet Union. So they failed for 10 years. Now, could the U.S. or could a coalition of Western nations do any better here, and what would the stakes be? History shows it would be a very tough fight indeed. And the question is whether or not the Afghani opposition would help in such a fight. They say that they've been fighting the Taliban for more than 5 years. They say they've already lost thousands of lives in that fight, and they say they have the experience and the knowledge to help the U.S. or a Western coalition that perhaps might fight in Afghanistan. But so far, contacts between the two sides, according to opposition figures here, have been minimal. Colleen.
CNN's Steve Harrigan in northern Afghanistan for us. Thanks. Michael, over to you now.
OK, Colleen, thanks very much. Pakistan and Iran both say they'll take steps to seal their very long borders with Afghanistan. Both countries are at risk of receiving a flood of refugees in the event of any United States military strike on Afghanistan. Some Afghanis are already anticipating the strike. They're leaving their homes. Western aid agencies have already pulled out of Kabul, further worsening the situation for displaced Afghanis. Meanwhile, there are 8 international aid workers who have been caught in the middle of all of this. They are being held in Taliban custody, accused of attempting to convert Muslims to Christianity. Now, with the possibility of a military strike against Afghanistan, family members fear the detained aid workers may be in greater danger than ever before. Sheila Cast has that.
24-year-old Heather Mercer was excited last spring about going to Afghanistan with a Christian aid group.
She was trying to think of ways that she could really blend into the culture, and she just really wanted to immerse herself in another culture.
But within 5 months, Mercer and 7 other Westerners were arrested, charged with trying to convert Muslims to Christianity, a very serious charge in Afghanistan. And then this happened.
To the extent that governments such as the Taliban government in Afghanistan support such things, you need to understand you cannot separate your activities from the activities of these perpetrators.
Afghanistan, where Mercer is on trial, is at the top of the potential target list for U.S. military retaliation because of Afghanistan's support for Osama bin Laden, the top suspect in the terror attacks.
So on Thursday, U.S. and German diplomats pulled out of Afghanistan, along with United Nations and some Red Cross workers. There is no one from the U.S. there to continue negotiations about Mercer and the other American, Dana Curry.
Even Heather's mother, Deborah Oddie, who had just arrived in Afghanistan on Tuesday, was forced to leave. Her head covered as required, she told reporters it was, quote, devastating to leave after just one visit with her daughter.
It sounds like she's in a dangerous situation as it is, and now with what's happened in the last week, that's heightened.
Everyone's prayer is that just God brings her through this safely. She's expelled from the country. That's our best hope.
To be expelled rather than forgotten as the United States decides the next step in its new war on terrorism. Sheila Cast for CNN, Washington.
Well, President Bush is leaving little doubt about what the attacks mean for the United States. And as Kelly Wallace reports, he now faces the challenge of maintaining public support as he goes ahead and plans a response.
Spending the weekend at the secluded presidential retreat in the Maryland mountains, President Bush huddles with his national security team and prepares the American people for war.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly.
The president refuses to discuss military options, but for the first time, he specifically named suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden as a, quote, prime suspect behind Tuesday's terrorism spree. Bin Laden is believed to be hiding out in Afghanistan, with the ruling Taliban government providing him safe haven.
This act will not stand. We will find those who did it. We will smoke them out of their holes. We will get them running. And we'll bring him to justice.
When asked if those words mean President Bush is considering using ground troops to attack terrorists, aides say nothing has been ruled out. But winning this so-called war and finding the elusive bin Laden won't be easy, says a former Clinton administration official.
We're not fighting a military, we're not fighting an organized power, but we're fighting a very diffuse and shadowy organization that has links in many different parts of the world.
Knowing Americans are hungry for swift retaliation, the president uses his radio address to say a sweeping response will come in time.
You will be asked for your patience, for the conflict will not be short. You will be asked for resolve for the conflict